It's hard to imagine the United States not involved in geopolitics and world affairs. But believe me, there was a time when they were only ever focused on solidifying their nation. However, what triggered the US to be such a colonizing force that everyone knows of today? Hello there, and welcome to Eventful Insights. Today we're going to talk about the Spanish-American War. Tune in as we jump from Cuba to Guam to the Philippines in this intense war of two strong nations. But before that, do you know which other countries Spain colonized? Share your answers in the comments section below. Now we start our story in Cuba. In 1823, President Monroe announced the Monroe Doctrine, saying the US wouldn't let European countries take more land in America. Before the Civil War, some wanted to buy Cuba and make it a slave state, but that didn't happen. After the war, American businessmen took control of Cuba's sugar trade. The US wanted a canal in Nicaragua or Panama for protection. Captain Mahon's ideas influenced President Theodore Roosevelt, who wanted a war with Spain over Cuba. José Martí led the Cuba Libre movement from Florida until he died in 1895. Cuba, once a Spanish colony heavily reliant on sugar production, saw growing discontent among its people in the latter half of the 19th century due to the corrupt and unyielding Spanish government. Despite Cuban pleas for self-governance, Spain refused, leading to the 10 Years' War from 1868 to 1878, waged by Cuban nationalists seeking independence. The 10 Years' War, lasting from 1868 to 1878, was mostly a guerrilla fight, with no big battles and decisive moments. Instead, there were lots of small fights and surprise attacks. Important moments included when Carlos Manuel de Céspedes declared the eastern provinces of Cuba free in 1868, sparking the rebellion, and when rebel leaders set up a new government in 1869, pushing for things like ending slavery and giving all men the right to vote. Cuban rebels, led by folks like Máximo Gómez and Antonio Maceo, kept clashing with Spanish soldiers. In 1873, tensions rose when a Spanish ship captured a boat helping the rebels, causing a problem with the United States. But even with all this, there were no big battles that settled things. Instead, the war dragged on until 1878, when the Pact of Zanjón was signed. It promised some changes, but Cuba didn't get full independence. Although the rebellion subsided, dissatisfaction lingered. In 1895, when conflict erupted again, Spain dispatched 200,000 troops, prompting Cuban insurgents to damage Spanish property in hopes of US intervention, given American economic interests in Cuba. General Weyler, dubbed the Butcher, was deployed in 1896 to quell the rebellion, establishing concentration camps where many Cubans died from disease. General Valeriano Weyler earned the infamous nickname the Butcher because of his cruel tactics. He enforced a harsh policy known as reconcentrado, forcibly relocating more than 300,000 civilians into camps where they suffered from hunger and disease. The death toll in these camps was estimated to be between 150,000 and 400,000 individuals. General Weyler's actions in Cuba were greatly exaggerated and sensationalized by the American press, particularly through the practice of yellow journalism, led by media moguls William R. Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. Yellow journalism is a style of reporting characterized by sensationalism, exaggeration, and often fabricated stories to attract readers and sell newspapers. It originated in the late 19th century, particularly in the United States, where competing newspapers engaged in fierce circulation wars. Yellow journalism often prioritizes shocking headlines, emotional language, and graphic imagery over factual accuracy and objective reporting. Now, engaged in a fierce rivalry, Hearst's New York Journal and Pulitzer's New York World competed for readership by fabricating stories and exaggerating events. In response to reports of Weyler's atrocities in Cuba, Hearst dispatched artists, including Frederick Remington, to illustrate these accounts, aiming to boost newspaper sales. Despite Remington's initial findings that the rumors were overstated, Hearst famously declared, "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war," highlighting his intent to manipulate public opinion. While yellow journalism played a significant role in shaping public sentiment towards Cuba, it was based on some factual basis regarding Weyler's actions. Spain recalled Weyler in 1897 amid growing concerns and discussions about Cuban independence. Yellow journalism, characterized by sensationalism and fabrication, aimed to increase newspaper circulation by exploiting events like the Cuban atrocities. Though it did not directly cause the Spanish-American War, the media's influence was significant, with Hearst even dubbing it the Journal's War, highlighting the war's media-driven nature. Reports of atrocities incited outrage in the US, yet President Cleveland staunchly opposed war, pledging never to deploy military forces to Cuba even if Congress declared war. In January 1897, the United States dispatched the USS Maine, led by Captain Charles D. Sigsbee, to Cuba amid concerns about the situation there. The ship's mission was ostensibly friendly, aiming to assess the situation and provide an exit strategy for Americans if necessary. Around this time, Hearst's newspaper obtained a letter from Spain's minister in Washington, Dupuy de Lome, which criticized President McKinley. Hearst promptly published the scandalous letter, leading to public outrage in the US and embarrassment for Spain, resulting in Dupuy de Lome's resignation and escalating tensions between the two nations. 6 days after the publication of the letter, the USS Maine arrived in Havana Harbor, catching the Spanish off guard. While the ship claimed a friendly purpose, its powerful presence alarmed Spanish authorities, who felt it was an attempt to intimidate them and interfere with Spanish sovereignty over Cuba. However, on February 15, 1898, tragedy struck as the Maine exploded suddenly in Havana Harbor, claiming the lives of 260 out of 350 American sailors and officers. Hearst's newspaper sensationalized the event, blaming Spain for the explosion, which fueled anti-Spanish sentiments in the US. Investigations into the incident yielded conflicting results, with the US alleging a Spanish mine caused the explosion, while Spain claimed it was an internal issue with the ship. The explosion of the USS Maine remains shrouded in mystery, with various theories proposed, but none definitively proven. Despite uncertainties, the incident galvanized pro-war factions and yellow journalists, like Hearst, who capitalized on public outrage to push for war with Spain. While some view the explosion as a tragic accident, others argue that the US had been preparing for war prior to the incident, suggesting it merely served as a catalyst for conflict. Spain relied on Cuba for its reputation and commerce, utilizing the island as a place to train its military forces. Spanish Prime Minister Antonio Cánovas del Castillo made it clear that Spain was willing to sacrifice its wealth and people's lives rather than allow any loss of territory. Cánovas had been a dominant and stabilizing figure in Spanish politics for a considerable time. However, his assassination in 1897 by Italian anarchist Michele Angiolillo left Spain with a less stable political system that couldn't afford any damage to its reputation. Public opinion across the country strongly called for immediate action, despite efforts by President McKinley, Speaker of the House Thomas Brackett Reed, and business leaders to seek a peaceful solution. Businesses, including those on Wall Street and Main Street, were vocal in their opposition to war, fearing its negative impact on the economy, which had only recently begun to recover from years of depression. McKinley, influenced by the anti-war stance of the business community, preferred diplomatic solutions over military intervention to end Spain's control in Cuba. However, a speech by Republican Senator Redfield Proctor on March 17, 1898, swayed many previously anti-war individuals, leading McKinley to ask Congress for authority to send troops to Cuba. Proctor depicted the dire consequences of Spain's reconcentration policy, attributing the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Cubans to its implementation. He detailed the conditions in concentration camps, where inhabitants endured unsanitary environments and scarcity of food and water, resulting in rampant disease and fatalities. Then on April 19th, Congress passed the Teller Amendment, assuring that the U.S. wouldn't permanently control Cuba after the war. It declared that the United States had no intention of annexing Cuba after the war and was committed to leaving the island to its people once hostilities ceased. In response, Spain severed diplomatic ties with the U.S. on April 21st, and the U.S. Navy initiated a blockade of Cuba. On April 20th, 1898, tension between the United States and Spain reached a boiling point when the U.S. issued an ultimatum to Spain, demanding that they withdraw from Cuba or face American military action. Misinterpreting this ultimatum as a declaration of war, Spain promptly expelled the U.S. ambassador and retaliated with its own declaration of war. The U.S. wasted no time, and by April 22, 1898, the American fleet was already en route to establish a blockade. On April 25, 1898, the United States officially declared a state of war, citing the existence of hostilities since April 21, 1898. This marked the beginning of the Spanish-American War, a conflict that would have significant consequences for both nations and the wider world. On April 25th, the U.S. Congress declared that a state of war existed between the U.S. and Spain. This action followed a naval strategy crafted by Lieutenant Commander Charles Train 4 years prior, which outlined plans for a blockade in Havana, Matanzas, and Sagua La Grande once war was proclaimed against Spain. While the Navy was prepared, the Army was not fully ready for war, prompting quick adjustments and purchases of supplies. In spring 1898, the U.S. regular army had only 24,593 soldiers, but the Army aimed to increase its numbers to 50,000. Surpassing expectations, over 220,000 volunteers and National Guard units mobilized, with nearly 100,000 enlisting after the USS Maine explosion. President McKinley issued 2 calls for volunteers, the first on April 23rd for 125,000 men and a second for an additional 75,000 volunteers. States in the Northeast, Midwest, and West met their quotas swiftly, leading to quota increases in some northern states. However, southern states like Alabama, Kentucky, and others struggled to meet even their initial quotas, partly due to restrictions on African American volunteerism. Disproportionate quota requirements compared to eligible populations led to challenges in meeting recruitment targets, with some states accepting out-of-state volunteers to fulfill quotas. Following Spain's declaration of war against the United States on April 23rd, tensions escalated rapidly, with both nations making strategic preparations for conflict. But before we delve into the very battle between the United States and Spain, what do you think was the role of the media during this time of war? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. If you want to know more about warfare and which nations were at war with each other before, head to our channel for more videos like this. Now let's go back. As the American government mobilized its military forces and issued calls for volunteers to bolster its ranks, plans for war extended beyond the immediate battleground of Cuba. Lieutenant William Warren Kimball, serving as staff intelligence officer with the Naval War College, played a pivotal role in crafting a comprehensive strategy for engaging Spain, including operations in the Philippines. This plan, known as the Kimball Plan, laid the groundwork for American military actions in the Pacific Theater, marking a significant expansion of the conflict beyond the shores of Cuba. The strategy centered on naval tactics such as blockades, bombardments, and maritime engagements to disrupt Spain's supply lines in Cuba. It sought to reduce expenses and casualties, deeming it the most feasible option, particularly given the challenges posed by the rainy season. The plan prioritized leveraging the United States naval superiority for a maritime conflict rather than committing to a land invasion of Cuba. On April 23, 1898, a publication in the Manila Gazette, attributed to Governor-General Basilio Augustin, alerted Filipinos to the imminent conflict and urged them to support Spain. Meanwhile, Theodore Roosevelt, serving as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, directed Commodore George Dewey, leading the United States Navy's Asiatic Squadron, to prepare for potential hostilities. Roosevelt instructed Dewey to station the squadron in Hong Kong, ensuring it remained fully supplied with coal. In the event of war with Spain, Dewey's primary task was to prevent the Spanish fleet from leaving the Asiatic coast and to undertake offensive operations in the Philippine Islands. Departing on April 27th, Dewey's squadron arrived in Manila Bay on April 30th. The resulting conflict was highly imbalanced, as Spain had failed to prepare either its military forces or its naval fleet for a distant confrontation with the formidable might of the United States. Picture this: May 1st, 1898, the Battle of Manila Bay unfolds. On the eve of battle, Admiral Dewey's watchful eyes catch sight of Luzon, the heart of the Philippine archipelago. Under the cloak of night, Dewey's squadron slips past the guns of Corregidor Island and into Manila Bay. With the break of dawn, the American fleet spots the aging Spanish armada anchored off the Cavite naval station. But amidst the outdated vessels, Dewey's fleet stands formidable, a testament to the tireless efforts of Theodore Roosevelt, the dynamic Assistant Secretary of the Navy. At 5:40 a.m., Dewey issues the fateful command from the deck of his flagship, the Olympia. "You may fire when ready, Gridley." The ensuing barrage of cannon fire decimates the Spanish fleet, leaving their once proud ships in ruins. Despite their losses, the Spanish vessels stubbornly refuse to surrender, leading to a temporary lull before the battle resumes. By early afternoon, a signal from the USS Petrel signals victory as the Spanish fleet surrenders. The toll of battle is heavy for the Spanish, with over 370 souls lost, while the valiant Americans suffer fewer than 10 casualties. Dewey's triumph paves the way for the U.S. occupation of Manila and the eventual transfer of the Philippines from Spanish to American control. In the aftermath, the once mighty Spanish Empire crumbled and the Treaty of Paris was signed on December 10, 1898. Within its terms, Spain relinquished all rights to Cuba, yielded Guam and Puerto Rico to the United States, and handed over control of the Philippines to the United States for a sum of $20 million. With precision and determination, Dewey swiftly annihilated the anchored Spanish fleet within a mere 2 hours, prompting a temporary halt in the Battle of Manila Bay. Remarkably, Dewey's crew even paused for a second breakfast amid the chaos. The American casualties were minimal, with fewer than 10 seamen lost, while the Spanish suffered a staggering loss of over 370. By August, Manila itself was under the occupation of U.S. troops, marking a significant victory in the broader conflict. Meanwhile, on June 20, 1898, the USS Charleston, led by Captain Henry Glass, along with 3 ships carrying troops to the Philippines, arrived at Guam's Apia Harbor. Captain Glass received orders to seize Guam while en route to the Philippines. The Charleston fired a few shots at the empty Fort Santa Cruz without any response. Thinking it was a salute, 2 local officials came out to apologize for their inability to return the salute due to a lack of gunpowder. Glass informed them about the war between the U.S. and Spain. The next day, Lieutenant William Brownus Reuter met with the Spanish governor to arrange the surrender of the island and its garrison. The Governor-General, his staff, and Spanish soldiers were taken as prisoners of war and transported to the Philippines. Frank Portusach, the only U.S. citizen on the island, assured Captain Glass that he would manage things until U.S. forces returned. Following these decisive actions in Guam and the Philippines, the Spanish-American War continued to unfold, ultimately leading to significant shifts in power and territory. With the United States emerging victorious, the aftermath of the conflict saw substantial changes, not only in the territories involved, but also in global geopolitics. As the war drew to a close, new challenges and responsibilities emerged for the United States, marking the beginning of a new chapter in its role on the world stage. Theodore Roosevelt advocated for intervention in Cuba, both to aid the Cuban people and to uphold the principles of the Monroe Doctrine. During his tenure as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, he mobilized the Navy for potential conflict and prepared Dewey's Asiatic Squadron for battle. Additionally, he collaborated with Leonard Wood to persuade the Army to raise a volunteer regiment, known as the 1st U.S. Volunteer Cavalry, or the Rough Riders, with Wood assuming command. The American strategy aimed to dismantle Spain's military presence in Cuba, seize the port city of Santiago de Cuba, and eliminate the Spanish Caribbean Squadron. To achieve these objectives, they had to overcome concentrated Spanish defenses in the San Juan Hills and the town of El Caney. The American forces received assistance from Cuban pro-independence rebels, led by General Calixto Garcia. For a considerable period, the Cuban populace viewed the United States government as a vital element to their quest for independence, even considering annexation at one point, as explored by historian Luis Perez in his book Cuba and the United States, Ties of Singular Intimacy. Cubans held deep-seated resentment towards the Spanish government due to years of exploitation and manipulation. Many Cubans saw the prospect of U.S. involvement as a positive development, albeit with some apprehension about American intentions. Nonetheless, the overwhelming support from the American public provided reassurance to the Cubans, fostering hope that the United States was genuinely committed to assisting them in achieving independence. Following defeats in Cuba and the Philippines and the destruction of its fleets in both regions, Spain sought peace, leading to negotiations between the two parties. After the British consul Edward Henry Rawson Walker fell ill and passed away, American Admiral Dewey enlisted the Belgian consul to Manila, Edouard André, to serve as an intermediary with the Spanish government. Hostilities ceased on August 12, 1898, with the signing of a Protocol of Peace in Washington between the United States and Spain. Following over 2 months of challenging negotiations, the formal peace treaty, known as the Treaty of Paris, was signed in Paris on December 10, 1898, and was subsequently ratified by the United States Senate on February 6, 1899. In the treaty, the United States acquired Spain's colonies of the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico, while Cuba transitioned into a U.S. protectorate. The treaty officially took effect in Cuba on April 11, 1899, with Cubans participating solely as observers. After being under United States military government jurisdiction since July 17, 1898, Cuba established its own civil government and gained independence on May 20, 1902, with the termination of USMG jurisdiction over the island. Nevertheless, the United States imposed various restrictions on the new government, including barring alliances with other nations, and retained the right to intervene. Additionally, the U.S. secured a de facto perpetual lease of Guantanamo Bay. Meanwhile, in Spain, the liberal Eugenio Montero Rios, leading the Spanish delegation at the Paris peace talks, lamented, "We've lost everything except the monarchy." Similarly, the U.S. ambassador in Madrid noted that politicians from the ruling parties were willing to risk war rather than dethrone the monarchy and lose Cuba. Spanish officers in Cuba even suspected that Madrid wanted their squadron destroyed to hasten peace negotiations. While defeats weren't uncommon in that era, Spain's loss in the war deeply affected the nation due to its connection with Cuba, particularly among intellectuals who gave rise to movements like regenerationism and the Generation of '98. However, the majority of the population, largely illiterate and under the rule of caciques, didn't feel the impact as strongly. The war marked a significant decline for the Spanish Empire, which had been diminishing since the 19th century. Spain retained only a few overseas territories, such as Spanish West Africa, Spanish Guinea, Spanish Morocco, and the Canary Islands. The loss of the Philippines rendered its remaining Pacific holdings untenable, leading to their sale to Germany in the German-Spanish Treaty of 1899. The Spanish-American War was a momentous battle in history, leading to the end of Spanish colonial rule in the Americas and the emergence of the United States as a global power. The conflict not only liberated Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines from Spanish control, but also propelled the United States onto the world stage as an imperial power. Through a combination of military victories, diplomatic negotiations, and legislative actions like the Teller Amendment, the war reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the Western Hemisphere and beyond, leaving a lasting impact on international relations and the course of future events. That is all for today's video. Do you think Spain continued to weaken as a nation after their defeat with the Americans? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more updates. Thanks for watching.